Dictatorship is in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. Rashif, last but not least, your thoughts?
I fully agree that the remark was meant for American ears and not Chinese ones. It does not serve any diplomatic purpose. And anyhow, China and the United States are heading into an economic and geopolitical and diplomatic clash. Things I don't think are going to get any better soon, regardless of this remark or another.
And on that note, gentlemen, let's please feel free to interact from this point onwards. Well, a slip of the tongue, yes or no, a deliberate one, yes or no. Beijing, of course, did not appreciate it. So let's take a quick listen to what we've heard coming out of China and pick it up from there.
The relevant remarks from the U.S. side were extremely ridiculous and irresponsible. They've severely violated basic facts and diplomatic protocol and China's political dignity. It was an open political provocation. China is strongly dissatisfied and resolutely opposes this.
Mr. Rashif, should China, quote unquote, swallow the bitter pill?
I don't think this is the biggest pill that China has to swallow. If we compare it, for instance, to the restrictions on technology, if we are talking about the coalitions that are being formed in front of China in the Pacific, this incident will be forgotten in 3 or 4 days. The other measures that were taken during the last 2 years will continue, will prevail, and this is the thing that will attract the most attention.
Admiral Montgomery, we keep on hearing those terms. Let's get things back on the right track. What is this track that they're talking about?
Well, I consider it a track of, really of appeasement almost. The idea that someone provokes you and then you ask for a conversation. You don't. What I mean by that is the spy balloon incident. Despite, if you want to talk about a gaffe, President Biden saying that President Xi didn't know shows a total disregard of how the Chinese Communist Party dominates the decision-making process in China. And the idea, and the PLA is not a normal military. It is a military arm of the party. The idea that something could drift over the United States, sit over our most sensitive sites, and then be an accident, that was a gaffe by President Biden. And the reality is, on top of that, the increased construction at the sites in Cuba, the J-20 cutting in front of the RC-135 spy plane, the destroyer cutting in front of the USS Chung-Hoon. Yeah. Over the last 5 months, there's been a series of provocations from China. And I got to tell you, you don't handle a bully by wringing your hands and saying, what can we do to make you stop? Right? You have to actually take actions. And the United States has delayed actions in response to those, whether it's sanctioning these, and we've delayed actions about the treatment of the Uyghurs and sanctioning the officials involved in that in Western China. And we've delayed these to allow for this engagement. And I think that is really a mistake. It plays into the bully's hands. And the United States should be a little more direct in its engagement with China and really insist on better behavior.
Professor Zhang.
Well, Admiral calls these things provocations, but the fact of the matter is that these incidents he was describing, the J-20 cutting off, things like that, they all happened very close to China. You have to wonder why these American planes, military airplanes, flying so close to China, and who is actually provoking who? I mean, these are interesting questions, and you have to straighten out these facts. With respect to this balloon incident. Chinese government has said that this is a particular balloon that is losing control of, and the government official stance is still that it's a satellite. It's not a satellite balloon. It's a balloon for collecting climate information. It's still up to debate whether the equipment discovered on the balloon is indeed kind of a so-called surveillance equipment, as Washington was describing. Yeah. Well, it hasn't been published or disclosed information about this equipment yet, even though he was talking about these things. And also want to point out that the kind of activities, even if it's exactly as described as by Admiral, these are exactly the same things the United States been engaged in all the time. It's been doing these things all the time. The spy balloons, the spy missions by.
I'm not sure. I first need to say, Montana hasn't moved suddenly to closer to China, right? This idea that these are all close to China, A, isn't true. But B, on top of it, this balloon loitered over two of the most sensitive strategic sites in the United States. That was not an accident. The gear is going to be revealed to be highly sensitive. I don't think the professor needs to carry on that story. And even the Xi regime has kind of stopped saying things out loud too much about that, waiting to see what we do. And look, the ship and aircraft were operating in international waters. That spy balloon was not in international waters. And the United States does not fly balloons over China, or the Chinese would have showed us those, immediately. We do not violate the territorial airspace of China and anything, in espionage actions. Both countries fly satellites over each other. That's in international airspace. So I think there is a difference.
It's a balloon losing control.
Look, the most I would say.
It's a balloon losing control.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What I'm saying is it's a balloon losing control. These balloons are not designed to fly.
It lost control over our two most sensitive sites, loitering over them for 2 days each. That's just magic loss of control is what I'll say. One thing I do think is important is that we communicate better. I am worried. I'm sure the professor is too. Yeah, I am worried about the it's incident similar to the EP3 that we had off Hainan Island, where a J8 and the EP3 collided. What we had back then was good communications at the State Department, Defense Department, and White House level. We don't have those now, and we need to reestablish those communications. And that's the one thing that we didn't get out of this meeting between Blinken and his team.
Mr. Rashif, chime in, please.
I think all those things that were mentioned here, with all those the importance that they carry, have to be put in the wider perspective, because we are talking about violation of international law in South China Sea. It's ignoring the sentence that was taken by international tribunal in Hague regarding the Philippines, the violation of the front line with India on the Himalayas, the Japanese islands. I mean, China is breaking any possible international law, and at the end of the story, we are getting to the point that for China, it's essential that they will not comply with international laws because they want to dictate the law. This is the Chinese way. We do it our way because we are China, and the approach of the United States and Japan and India and Vietnam and Malaysia and Australia, and I can continue, is that everybody, including China, does comply with the international norms and laws.
Yeah, Professor Zhang, before we take a break, wrap it up for us. Professor Zhang, we lost communications. No, you're with us. Okay, yeah, so Admiral Montgomery, again, briefly, before we take a break and continue right after, are we past the point of rebuilding trust? Is it even a relevant term in the context of the current affairs, of state of affairs, rather?
No, because we achieved trust with the Soviet Union, but it takes communications at all levels in a crisis. I do think that the United States needs to insist that those military-to-military communications restart before we start off into these strategic talks again, because not having those communications actually does allow for escalation.
Okay, and as you've mentioned earlier, you believe that the Blinken whirlwind tour there in Beijing did not achieve this objective, so we will unpack what it did or didn't achieve there. So a short break, and we're back with the rest of the summit. Do not go anywhere.
Esta semana en News 24 analizamos la gira por países latinoamericanos amigos del presidente de Irán, Ebrahim Raisi. Día Mundial de las Tapas, una tradición gastronómica española que estuvo presente en Tel Aviv. El Ballet Nacional de España bailará flamenco, bolero y danzas tradicionales en su presentación en Israel. News 24, el magazine semanal en español de i24 News.
It's a living, breathing organism that pulsates through millennia. Touch it, listen to it, smell it, taste it. Experience the Holy Land like never before. Holy Land Uncovered, every Sunday, only on i24 News.
If you could travel to the Middle East right now without packing and without a plane ticket, would you? We are in Tel Aviv, Israel. Welcome to i24 News Digital.
Here, we bring Israel and the entire Middle East right to your social networks.
On your phone, on your desktop. Here, i24 News creates videos especially made for social media. And believe me, we are out there working hard.
Right here.
Israel and Nepal.
For the very first time.
Is how they begin. Making original content. Streaming live, even in the hard moments.
There are literally rockets going off. I'm in a bomb shelter.
And filming docuseries. With us, you will find all the big stories you missed on television. So join i24 News on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
And discover the Middle East with us.
We're on the inside of political and religious passions in Jerusalem, breaking down the financial trends shaping the global economy, giving you key context, not just headlines, with the stories from Israel that touch the U.S. and those across the region with impact far beyond its borders. Catch the rundown where the Middle East meets the world.
Sometimes it's tough to get past all the noise and get to the heart of the story. Even tougher to make sense of it all. And that's where we come in. I'm David Matlin, and each weekday I'll take on the most important topics, breaking down the issues so you can decide for yourself. Zoom in each weekday here at i24 News.
Strictly Security, your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts, analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Saturdays, only on i24 News.
Welcome back. Still with us here at the summit, Admiral Mark Montgomery, Talbot Chief, and Professor Gong Jiang. Thank you, gentlemen, so very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, of course, but before we get back to our discussion, perhaps the most frustrated party at this diplomatic shindig, the slip of the tongue, that is, Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, wrapping up what he hoped would be a trip that could restore some good faith, industrial quiet, so to speak. Let's take a quick listen and we'll unpack it up.
One of the important things for me to do on this trip was to disabuse our Chinese hosts of the notion that we are seeking to economically contain them. We're not. And as I've said, we are not about decoupling. We're about de-risking and diversifying. That means investing in our own capacities and in secure, resilient supply chains. pushing for level playing fields for our workers and our companies, defending against harmful trade practices, and protecting our critical technologies so that they aren't used against us. I made clear that we'll continue to take targeted actions that are necessary to protect U.S. national security.
Yeah, lots of terms there. De-risking, diversifying. Bottom line, was the Blinken trip a success or a failure? Another quick fire round, 30 seconds each, and we take it from there. Tal Rashif, your 30 seconds are on.
As I said, things have to be put in the wider perspective in order to understand them. It's not this incident or that incident. And for the moment, the possibility of decoupling, if everybody says that we are not heading into decoupling, it means that it's on the table. Otherwise, nobody would have talked about it. And it's because for China, pride is essential. They would not comply with orders and instructions coming from international rules and from international organizations, especially not from the United States. And as long as China does not comply with any of these, cooperation will get into stormy weather every second week. So we are heading into a more and more difficult area, and I don't see any of the sides backing up from it.
Admiral Montgomery, your thoughts?
I don't, I'm not a big fan of having engagement for engagement's sake. I was glad that he got to see Secretary Blinken got to see President Xi. I think there was a general airing of grievances. I mean, 7 hours is a long meeting, even with translation. And, airing of grievances is sometimes good to understand what really matters to the other side. In a disagreement, but overall, I don't think it achieved much, and I think whatever it achieved was damaged pretty significantly by President Biden's comments afterwards. And it's time for the United States to continue to take the steps it's taking domestically to protect itself, while continuing to agree to discuss things on those mill-to-mill channels if it's offered by the Chinese.
Professor Jiang, your thoughts?
I think it's a very good success there. I look at just the respective statements or readouts from the two governments. They're very close in my view. They're not widely in disagreement, and also the fact that President Xi saw Anthony Blinken, which is what was not announced prior to the trip, was a very good sign that some progress has already been made. Now, regarding the issue about establishing military channels, my understanding is that the Chinese military is not so much interested, because essentially what it does is to provide a free pass for the American side to continue these reconnaissance trips, which is very close to the shores of China. It just institutionalized these practices, and it's just something the Chinese side is not interested in doing at all.
Okay, gentlemen, let's please feel free to interact. Obviously, the world is watching, most notably the Chinese neighbors and the American allies, South Korea, the Philippines, Japan, of course. Can they really have a sigh of relief? Did the visit change anything from their standpoint, Admiral?
I suspect not. I mean, I don't think that things have changed significantly enough for for Australia or Japan or Taiwan to feel more secure or less secure from the output. Again, and I think that's not a fair expectation for Secretary Blinken. I don't. It would have been or his Chinese counterparts. I don't think that was really ever in the offing. But this is not the president's first gaffe on this. I don't know if it's why he does it, whether, he's 4 times he said that we will defend Taiwan. And once he's called Taiwan a country. Now he said that called President Xi out loud a dictator. All of these things I think are true. They're also things we don't generally say in public. So he's either extremely cunning or has a slight bit of dementia. I'm kind of betting on extremely cunning, and it's a way of doing it. I don't think he expected his private remark to get out. In this case, but all in all, it undermines the whatever the effect was of this discussion.
Yeah, privacy always comes with a caveat when you're president and there are cameras. Perhaps maybe something that needs to be taken into consideration. Tal Rashif, what do you think? Did it change anything?
No, I don't think. I think that the things are going their direction for a very long time, at least for 2015, at least, in some aspects even much before that. So, and they will continue, and it will degrade. And we have to remember that it's not only the United States and China. We have a list of other countries that are well inflicted in it. I mentioned before Australia, Japan. We have to add Vietnam, Korea, and the Philippines. They are all involved, and as long as there is the dispute whether the international law applies to China or whether China is an exception that makes its rule for itself, things will not get any better, regardless of all these points that were mentioned.
But you know, Professor Zhang, we keep on talking about what move can be done, a proactive act, this one or another, to ease tensions. But perhaps there is a fundamental gap here, because President Xi clearly conveying once again his take on the state of relationships, saying China is not in competition with the U.S. The U.S. competes this outlook, saying we are in competition. So in fact, Washington is countering, so to speak, and Beijing is focused on expanding. What's the middle ground here? Yeah, slight delay.
If he's frozen, I'll jump in and say that you know, President Xi weirdly is right when he says we're not in competition, but that's because from about 2002 to 2017, maybe even a little bit later, 2019, the United States was not competing. We were distracted by events in the Middle East. Yeah. We were thinking about other things. We'd convinced ourselves that that this economic growth would lead to political liberalization in China. All these things turned out not to be true. And so China, you know, had an open field for 17 years. So it's not surprising for Xi to think he's not in competition. I do think we're in a competition. I don't think it has to lead to war, and I hope it doesn't. But I believe that the United States has to act like we're in a competition. That doesn't mean we have to decouple. It means I do understand what de-risking means. I do think we need to limit the technology transfer from the United States and our allies to China. But it is, we are in a competition.
Professor Jiang, we'll give it another shot before we conclude.
Yeah, well, competition is okay. I think, you know, the Chinese side would be happy to accept the competition, other than what kind of competition we're talking about. Competition really means that you do the things on your own part to make yourself more competitive, as opposed to do things to damage the other side, to
Okay, if I can add something using this point.
Action, for example, in semiconductor field, companies like companies in Korea and Japan, that's something to underline the Chinese side.
Yeah. As I started to say, competition exists. Of course, China and United States are in competition. It's clear. But at the same time, Japan and Korea are in competition. France and England are in competition. Right. This is not something new. The point is whether this competition is leading to geopolitical crisis.
Right.
And in China and the United States, the answer is yes.
And on that note, gentlemen, Admiral Montgomery, Professor Jiang, Mr. Rashif, thank you very much. And I will allow myself to wish you all, and Professor Zhang especially, happy Dragon Boat Festival, right? This is the time of the season. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for joining us.